presenter is from Italy, fresh from Italy, and is Dr. Clement Onime. He's the head ICTP Italy. Please let us encourage him. Please, Dr. Onime, please come and deliver your paper. Look, let's encourage him. All from Italy.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I can assure you that I don't look like an Italian. I'm actually a Nigerian. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you today. Incidentally, when I was first approached to talk about or to talk on this topic, I did reply that I didn't feel I was the right person. So my background is also engineering, electronics, and electrical engineering, and I've been working in the field of computing for a long time now. So yesterday I did have the chance to meet the registrar in person. I've never met her before, so it was the first meeting I had with her yesterday. And one of the things I mentioned to her was that actually my father was a graduate of the University of Ibadan. And since I am at a registry program, I would like to ask for his transcripts. But what was actually appealing was her reply. And her reply was that, look, I can even give you his file if you want. You know, and this morning she started speaking about high performance, and I was like, okay, so I'm in the right place because I've been working in high performance computing as well. I will just go straight into the presentation because of time. There are some slides we probably won't cover. So I think I will start by trying to give some common definition or some common grounds to how we may see things like information, communication, and technology before we move on to looking at how administrative operations could be optimized through ICT. Then I will probably around slide 20 or so, I'll be looking at future outlooks, what we should expect probably in the next, I will say 10 to 20 years, what should become commonplace. Then I have a conclusion and then we move on. Okay, so generally information, I believe if I ask you now the question, what is information? It's not very easy to define information. In fact, it's really an abstract concept. Dictionaries will say it's typically an entity or something or a fact that has been recorded or that is manipulated or retold. So there are very different aspects with respect to information. We do understand that information has a strong relationship to knowledge, and some people say information has a way of making knowledge measurable or even adding value to knowledge. And there's also a philosophical angle to the term information. So you could have people from the social sciences talking about information just as well as people from computer science backgrounds or other fields. Interestingly enough, information does tend to have context. So you will agree with me that there's typically a communicator, somebody who's providing information. And typically his own concern is my information getting across? Am I passing the message that I want to pass? There is the communicant who is typically the recipient of the communication or the information, and his own idea is typically, is this what I really need right now? Is this information adequate or appropriate? Then we can also see from the perspective of the message. Is the message really correct? Is it maintaining its integrity? Nowadays we also speak of two items, which is that information is value, or information has value. And since I think around 1925, we've had people trying to look at the science of information. So there have been various theories, okay, that try to define information. Some of them are listed there. So it's amazing to see that today we are talking about quantum computing, but they started mentioning quantum information from about 1955. The one I find very interesting is the last one, which is semantic, okay? And that tends to say that information, we should not only look at the information, but also look at whether it is true or false. I think that's what makes a semantic theory much more interesting with respect to the other ones. The other ones don't seem to care about information. The information just goes out. But the semantic really tries to say we should also look at the correctness. The term communication typically is something that happens between multiple parties. You can't have one person communicating. You usually have to be communicating in at least two. So we do know of broadcast situations where you are communicating from one perspective to multiple people. Communication tends to be looked at as the sharing or the exchange of information, news, ideas, feelings. It's also considered as collectively or creating and sharing meaning together, or even trying to arrive at a mutual understanding. But most of all, communication is about connecting people. So it is a very useful way of connecting with other people, either colleagues or people from other fields. Okay, so the next slide, it's trying to give us a graphical idea. I think there used to be this saying that a picture tells more than 1,000 words. So every now and then I try to have a picture that gives us some idea about what's happening. So here I have put on the right, you can see there's an arrow that goes up and down, which represents the registry. And you have different categories of people or different communities, groups of people in the university environment. So you have the registry having to deal with students, staff, and alumni and other members of the community, or even families of students. And then you have the registry also having to interact with the departments, the colleges and the faculties, and as well as management. So the registry, like my colleagues have also mentioned earlier, is really something that cuts across from top to bottom in the university environment. Okay, so technology is really another term that is broad for practical applications of knowledge. A mechanical engineer will tell us about different kinds of technology. I think I remember when I was a kid, it was common to grind pepper using the stones. I think you hardly find people doing that nowadays because we now probably use grinding machines or use machines. So that has actually been a technological contribution, okay, to that process. In general, we should see technology as bringing about improvements. It may require people to undergo some retraining, but it's not about making people redundant or taking people or having people lose their jobs. Most times, technology can also lead to a simplification of processes and procedures. And a lot of, historically, people have spoken about technological revolutions. So you've had things like the steam revolutions, where there was the move from sailing ships to ships that were being driven by the steam engine. And then you also had cars that were also driven by technological means. So that's also a process that has been evolving over time. So when we put all these things together, we get information and communication technology. It's basically an umbrella term to say we are looking at development, maintenance, and use of technology in supporting the communication of information. Some people also say that ICT represents a unification. So we tend to see communication or telecommunication systems being combined with computer systems, or even softwares and computer networks, and all of them coming together to work for a common goal. I think you'll agree with me that ICT has actually been revolutionary, even for us as individuals. I remember a long time ago taking photographs. Today there was the photography session that happened here, and there was a photographer that was taking like 20 clicks, happily clicking away. I think if you go back to the days where he had to roll the film, roll and wind, he wouldn't have taken up to 20. He may have stopped after 2 or 3. But now that everything is digital, we have the digital cameras, we can afford to take as many photographs as we want. When I look at some of the young people nowadays, I ask myself that the way they take photographs, the number of photographs they take every day, I mean, if you look at them, probably in 1 year, they may have more photographs than I've taken in my entire lifetime. So it's just as interesting. But we also see that there's been a revolution in publishing information. So we've gone from paper-based mediums to things like PDF files or e-books. And then even the term broadcasting. So in our very early societies, probably I will say in the 1940s, I may be hazarding a guess here, if I wanted to get out a message to the university community, we may have employed town criers to go from the various halls of residence to another to give an announcement. And then we moved to notice boards, okay? But most of you, I guess, will have heard of Twitter. So nowadays, Twitter is more or less playing a massive role with respect to the broadcast of information, especially since one president started using it extensively. On the part of the users, you do have accessing information is moving to a situation where you don't have to search for information, but you can pick up information anytime, anywhere. And people have gone from using notice boards to being able to access websites. And nowadays we also have applications on your smartphones that bring the information directly to your cell phones. If you look at the society in general, you'll see that we are moving towards things like e-governance. There was somebody mentioning, one of the earlier speakers this morning spoke about, you can have e-lawyers, e-doctors, e-everything. Maybe they might plan for e-administrators. Well, I'm not sure that will come about, but the other thing it's also interesting is that most of us now have a social presence. So you find that somebody may have 5,000 friends online, but he actually doesn't have physical friends. So there's really something that is not really right in all these definitions. So now we'll go on to looking at some administrative procedures, and then I'll try and explain some examples of what we have today, and probably end up giving an example about what we have, what might be useful in the context of the registry. It's just a suggestion. Incidentally, these are not meant to be exhaustive. I'm only just touching on the tip of the iceberg, okay? Probably a lot of you may have much more knowledge than me with respect to some of these procedures. Okay, so you will agree with me that universities as institutions of higher learning typically have to maintain facilities for teaching and learning. And most times universities are licensed or authorized to grant degrees to individuals. So the core business of universities is really educating people. And I agree with a lot of the other speakers that the registry is a key arm of any university. In fact, I don't really believe that you can have a university without having a registry, simply because the registry has to provide information and services to all members of the university community. So starting from students all the way to families, or even people who have graduated maybe 40 or 50 years ago. Okay, they might still require some services, and it's the registry that has to typically provide them service or information. Okay, so just looking at some of the operations that may happen in a university or an academic environment, I came up with, let's say, 4 holistic but interrelated sections. So there's the human resource. My colleague spoke about human resource earlier. I think he seems to have gone. And then there are the physical facilities. So we're in a lecture hall right now, or we're in a hall right now, one of the famous ones. There's also educational services that relate with the courses and the scheduling of courses, also reproduction of materials, or even the curriculums that are taught to the students. And there's also a financial aspect. So university do have assets, so there are all kinds of purchases and paying and buying going on with respect to keeping the university community or the university environment running. So I'll try and pick each of these sectors one by one and talk about the ICT systems that are in place right now, that things you can either deploy. I won't give you specific examples because they are both commercial and non-commercial implementations, but I'll just talk briefly about some of the characteristics and what they do. So in the university environment with respect to human resources, we tend to see the growth of two systems. So there's the human resource information system, and this tends to be applied more towards staffing. So it's a complete package that tends to manage everything from the recruitment process, sending out vacancies, scheduling interviews, carrying out the interview process, collecting feedback from the interview committee, all the way to creating a contract of employment, of course, based on some template, okay, for the incoming staff. Typically, it's also responsible for keeping, in a secure manner, the storage of records, so things like the personal data of the staff, processing benefits, okay, things like that. And many times, in many situations, it's also capable of doing payroll. I do understand that the university has a payroll system in place, but it's not clear whether some of the other components listed here are being distributed or are being provided. Interestingly enough, it does tend to manage a workflow. So workflow is a new term I'm probably just introducing now, but it tends to relate to the idea of having multiple levels of authorization. So when I have a workflow, I can prepare a document and send it to a second level who authorizes or sends it back for corrections or modifications. So in a sense, it captures the process that typically happens in administrative operations. On the other hand, at the other extreme, we're also seeing student information systems. So there's this idea that to enroll in your courses, you don't have to have a printed form that you take to, I'm sure probably this isn't happening anymore, but in my days as an undergraduate, we had to have a printed form that you have to take to one lecturer to the other to get a signature to signify that you are enrolled in a course. Most of these systems also can grade some form of assignments. So even things like correcting exercises, or you have multiple choice questions, the system can actually carry out the grading without waiting for human intervention. They do also tend to track attendance or even progress. So they can notify the academicians in time that this student seems to be struggling with a particular course. Maybe he needs some extra help or something similar. Just like the HRIS systems, they're also responsible for the secure storage of all student data. So where does the student live when he's in this environment? What's his phone number? And nowadays we're also seeing such systems working at delivering the lecture schedules directly to the mobile phone of individual students, or even sending out a notice. You want to pass a notice to all students of a particular faculty, you can trigger an alert from such a system that will be delivered to their cell phones or to their emails directly. Physical facilities, campuses tend to have a lot of buildings. So now, as engineers, we're also talking about smart buildings, or even the concept of smart cities. One of the things I was thinking about is that, at least at my institute, if at a certain time of the day they have to switch off all the lights and turn down the air conditioning just to save energy or the energy cost, because electricity cost and things like that. So these are all parts of the need to have smart buildings, where the buildings will say, okay, today it's quite cold, let's, instead of putting on the air conditioning, sort of like introduce a little heating. So things like temperature control, humidity control, or even customizations that a particular office occupant may like, his level of lighting and things like that, are now possible based on Internet of Things devices. On the other hand, we also have security and access control. In my discussions with the registrar, I think one of the points she kept on emphasizing is that even if your job is just a porter, you do have something to contribute to the community. So the gate man may not understand that his role is very vital unless you begin to look at the fact that internationally campuses are considered like they could be targets for bombs and things like that. So the security people do have a lot of work just to ensure that we don't have tragic situations happening on campuses. So nowadays there are systems like biometric authentication systems where you are authorized to access either your computer or you're authorized to access a building either by providing your thumbprint or by an iris or facial print. Even things like the production of ID cards for the students is also now seeing a lot of ICT attention. So the ID cards are becoming much smarter. They can also give you, they also carry information about what you are authorized to do. Okay, we have, I guess most of us do have bank cards. So you do have the bank cards as well as the multiple, maybe you carry also a token. So in addition to doing your banking online, you may have to type in a code from a particular token. But where I think is becoming interesting is also that ICT tools are also contributing heavily to monitoring. A lot of these systems may fail or they may not work properly. Or if you look at the fact that there are so many different systems one has to pay attention to, you just need to have ICT tools that can provide you with a consolidated interface so you don't have to look at 10 or 20 monitors at the same time just to figure out whether there's a security problem at one part of the campus or the other. You could have a consolidated interface, and even with things like artificial intelligence that can help you react better to situations. As an IT specialist, some of my task is also ensuring that the systems and services we have at ICTP or in my institute are running properly. And there are now smart applications, even on the mobile phone, that if something happens within 5 minutes, I get an alert. So before even my users get a feeling that something has gone wrong, I do have an alert and I have the time to try and fix it before people can notice. Although this doesn't mean we don't build systems to be robust. I think I'll talk about that a little later. So laboratories and computer equipment also are now able to provide digital outputs. So the purchase of laboratory equipment is getting interesting because you can have these equipments deliver their data directly to computers for processing or for carrying out the second stage of the research work that the academicians tend to engage in. And I think it's very important to ensure that this kind of thing progresses because it just makes life easier for them. Like I mentioned earlier, authorized operations. So your ID card can actually give you access to your telephones or even access to a computer. So we're moving towards a system where you can log into any computer and your work is delivered directly to you. So you don't have to, so if your computer breaks down, it's simply just replaced, and in 2 minutes later, you are ready to work without problems. Okay, so I'm almost out of time. I didn't think I was that slow. Okay, so financial resources. This is also a cross with the bursary. I think somebody did mention earlier that the bursary came out from the registry, so I'm not going to spend much time here, but there are tools for tracking everything from payments to assets, repairs, repair of equipment, and things like that. So educational services, we do have online learning now. So I think one of the questions we should be looking at is a lot of the professional bodies, are they providing online tools so that you can retrain yourself on the job without having to take time off from your work? This makes gaining knowledge particularly interesting. And then there are also library information systems that are making the library also available with an anytime, anywhere model. So where I would probably like to spend a few minutes is to talk about conceptually what could happen with respect to records and transcripts management, maybe for an institution like UI. I think we should start from looking at goals. So from the goal of the end user, who's probably an alumni or a student who wants to transfer, he would like to have access to his transcripts or his grades on demand, basically whenever he wants to, without much delay. And he will probably like to do it by himself, so that when he's ready, he just simply logs into a site and maybe triggers a request for his transcript to be sent somewhere. I think maybe the foundations of this system may already be in place. From the side of the registry staff, I think there's a need to reduce the amount of effort in trying to prepare transcripts. I remember when I needed transcripts to proceed for my PhD degree, it took several months because they had to go to the department to try and chase down results. Some results had not been submitted to the registry and things like that. So, as well as we also need to look at the fact that by simplifying the effort needed, it means there's more capacity to do other work. So people have more time. But the goal is not really to make redundant or to replace manpower, but really to ensure that we retrain manpower to work with these new systems. So I've listed on the right-hand side several stages that could be involved, but like I said, this is a bit of conceptual. So one of them is trying to transform our current processes and procedures. So we need to look at the workflows, what's coming from the departments, from the faculties, the colleges, and going to the registry or vice versa. So things like registration for courses, examination scheduling, or even reporting after, as you have an invigilator creating a report after an examination has occurred. Especially if there's an incident, you want to capture all these things online and as quickly as possible. Collection and returning of grades. The other aspect is that there are a lot of old records that you want to digitize, and the goal is to try and digitize them to text, not to images, because it's more efficient and it becomes searchable. So you can have the data for a particular person in a second, as long as it's text. There's the protection and the replication and backups. So you need to have adequate systems in place to ensure that once data is digitized, it's not lost. Okay, so even if the paper version gets destroyed, you still have the digital copy intact. Of course, there's also security, where we are going to look at that probably later on. Okay, so we cannot see this clearly, but they were supposed to show several rooms. So the three on the left actually have shelves, and you have files and records all just dumped on the shelves. So trying to extract a piece of information in this context is quite difficult. It takes a lot of effort and manpower. So we would like to evolve to a situation we see on the other side of the diagram, or we saw on the other side of the diagram, which was using computers. So even now, something as small as your memory card can hold a lot of data. Here I would like to say that optimizing administrative procedures starts from you, it starts from me, it starts from each and every one of us as individual. We need to look at ourselves and ask, what am I doing? What can I use ICT, or how can I use ICT to optimize the procedures around me? I think when you look at personal developments, many times you have to retrain yourselves, you have to continue learning, you have to ensure that you are engaging yourself or trying to develop yourself. So ICT platforms help a lot with that because you can use them in the evenings after work to undertake learning programs. You can also use ICT for managing your daily schedules, calendars, and things like that. Nowadays, communicating, a lot of the younger generations do not really work very well, even with cell phones. They prefer to use things like WhatsApp messengers and things like that. I spent last week sending my children the cell phone number of their grandmother for them to call her, but I know it's not going to happen. So my next plan is to put grandma on WhatsApp, and I think once I put her on WhatsApp, then they will begin to communicate with her. But now we also see a lot of people appearing on Twitter, so researchers, academicians. It's becoming very useful, and it's now so easy for you to have an individual presence online. You can create a LinkedIn page, which is more work-related, as opposed to creating a page on Facebook. You know, they do exist. There are also applications for diagrams, for pictures and diagrams. So we'll just scan through briefly what we might see in future. Okay, these are terms you might probably not care so much about today, but there are things just to keep at the back of your mind. So we are going to see a lot of information mining. So once we have things digitized, we can analyze data better from different perspectives, create